You're welcome to call in for any wellness questions. This is going to be another wellness hour, and we're going to talk to Matthew, my oldest son. He's actually been studying natural medicine and Oriental medicine, and he's also has his own website, MatthewDeagle.com, and his own show over on the Rense Network. Currently it's at 12 to 1, Monday to Friday. Matthew Deagle.
Yeah, you can listen to me at 12 to 1 Pacific time on RenseRadio.com,
right.
Or any of the Rense carriers.
Right. So
I'm also...
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, my show discusses world events from an astrological and symbolic perspective. Looks at the world from a holistic...
Like Jordan Maxwell, in other words. So you're familiar with Jordan, right?
I'm somewhat familiar.
Yeah. So that's good, because the symbology is important. What I want to talk about today is I want to get into more nutraceuticals, because you're an expert on a lot of nutritional stuff, and as time goes on, you're becoming more and more involved with new nutraceutical development too. Earlier in the show, I talked about some of the history of my research in diabetes, and here's the chain of events. The University of California, San Diego, last February 2015, published that leukotriene B4 is the primary trigger for your macrophages. Your macrophages release that actually triggers off insulin and leptin resistance to cause diabetes. But what's the trigger for leukotriene B4? It's free radicals. So free radicals happen because you lose what's called superoxide dismutase 1 and 2 isoenzymes and glutathione peroxidase, and part of that is because of mineral deficiencies of things like selenium. And the knockout is with our diet, with all our mineral depletion and the excessive amount of rapidly absorbed sugar. So sugar is, in a sense, good and bad. It's good in the sense that your body actually causes insulin resistance, so it raises your blood sugar, because sugar is a fire retardant against free radicals. It's the best way to grab free radicals is sugar, believe it or not. It also, and secondarily, causes damage, but it's not as dangerous as a singlet oxygen. So we recommend people take glycemics to even out their blood sugar, with diabetoline to lower insulin resistance, and leptin metabolic, chromium cruciferate. And we also recommend they convert their white fat to brown fat with forskolin, Regenerex, and Cell Defense, because they're curcumins, and the forskolin will actually convert your white fat to brown fat. If you want to mobilize fat, we use LipoFlush, which is a conjugated linoleic acid, and we used to have the Carboblock, but now we contain it in the glycemics drink. And we also use Microdose, which is human growth hormone, and Mountain Red Velvet that have IGF-1, because IGF-1 counteracts insulin. Weight loss is a big problem, but it's not just that. When you're looking at all these markers, basically the underlying cause of type 2 hypothyroidism is insulin resistance, and it's all tied right back to these inflammatory things and free radicals. It's a big problem, and a lot of time the early nascent form is actually not hyperglycemia, but hypo. People starting to find their visions going, they feel faint, dizzy, they can't see colors, and all of a sudden they can't see properly to read or drive. Hypoglycemia is actually caused by a drop in your serum cortisol level where your blood insulin's high. It's made worse by things like Splenda and aspartame-laced drinks, and by monosodium glutamate and 29 other names of similar type of glutamic acid stimulants like hydrolyzed vegetable protein. And these are all really bad for blood sugar control. But the sugar is actually just a bystander. The primary problem is free radicals, which is why our approach to diabetes will be to reduce the leukotriene B4 and to increase insulin sensitivity with things like diabetoline and leptin metabolic, and the minerals that protect yourself like selenium cruciferate and cell detox glutathione. So when people are talking about just weight loss, what I tell people, first, you need to exercise, and the best exercise is we call the VibraSlim exercise. You're familiar with the VibraSlim exercise machine, Matt?
Yeah.
So now the current theory about diabetes is doctors often will chase blood sugar by giving people more insulin, and it actually compounds the problem, because the more insulin you have, if you actually check the average type diabetic, their insulin's anywhere from usually 3 to 6 times or even higher amounts. In fact, when we did our insulin glucose tolerance test back in the early 80s with Dr. Otto Hune, head of pathology at the University of Calgary, we had one diabetic who had a blood insulin level that was 55 times above normal. 55 times. The average was 6 to 12 times, up to 20 times higher than normal insulin. In other words, they're putting enough insulin out for 20 people. So if people think insulin is a deficiency syndrome that causes diabetes, they're blank wrong. except type 1 diabetics. Most of those, if you actually stop their pancreatic inflammation, the gland will come back, but they don't get a normal release curve. In other words, if they eat sugar, their release curve of insulin is kind of screwed up. So, any insights in terms of why you think North Americans are turning diabetic?
I think it partly has to do with a holistic thing. Our culture overall is excessively venereal. Remember, there's an oscillation and a dichotomy between those two.
I'm thinking about in terms of not just the symbology side, but the North American diet.
This
For
is
example,
how I look at things. Is that, remember, everything is symbolic, and the sweet taste and sugar are of a venereal nature. It corresponds to a desire for benefit, or a
that's why, in other words, people eat these artificially sweet Splenda and aspartame. They're thousands of times more sweeter than sugar, and unfortunately, they actually raise blood insulin.
The sweet taste evolved to tell you that it has a venereal effect on your life energy. So even if it isn't sugar itself, even if you don't digest it, it's going to have some kind of venereal effect on you.
Right.
Generally.
It actually raises blood insulin, by the way, and when you artificially raise blood insulin, you increase cortisol and stress hormones, you increase free radicals. So in other words, it actually makes the underlying problem that causes diabetes and insulin resistance worse. So when you give people a surge of insulin, either with a big blast of sugar from like a candy bar, or you're taking Splenda or aspartame, or just a big can of regular Coke rather than just Diet Coke, they're all bad. But believe it or not, the insulin levels are higher with aspartame and Splenda than they are even with sugar. Isn't that crazy? But you're right.
Yeah,
they have a society that's seeking sweetness in their life. In other words, they want the sweetness in their life to counteract the bitterness of their current status, right?
Well, that's yes, as I've said before on my show, that whole dichotomy between sweet and bitter, between desire for benefit and fear of harm, is a characteristic, the ill-dignified mercurial, a characteristic degeneration of our entire Western culture, which originates in the heresies of the Catholic Church and the Christian religion.
Yeah. In fact,
basically,
let me stop you for just a second.
It's equivalent to the dichotomy between fearing the punishments of God and assuaging those punishments through forgiveness. Again, it's totally false and detached from cause and effect.
Yeah, okay, now that's you're looking into the symbology and the side of it.
That's where it started. It spread from there to all sorts of other manifestations.
Let me insert an idea here, because I want you to continue with this. On video number 2 of Jonathan Gray's 4 DVD set, it's amazing. He talks about that. In fact, he actually shows a video of 2012 of a ceremony of a worship of Lucifer right in the Vatican. Now, people need to understand this, that when you're talking about the symbology and the ill-dignified and all these other things, you have to see that this issue, for example, of indulgences.
The word Lucifer refers originally to Venus, right? The venereal, right. The sweet, which in their false theology and false teachings about sin and forgiveness corresponds to Jesus. And in fact, in their version of the Bible, the Vulgate, he says, Ego sum stella splendida et matutina. I am the morning star.
Right.
Which means that Jesus is Lucifer.
Well, in fact, they say, I speak Latin too, Matt, and what they do is, in this ceremony in the Vatican, right? They actually, their version of Jesus is actually the son of Lucifer, according to the Vatican.
Well, their Jesus is Lucifer in the symbology, right? According to the astrological symbolism that they chose to put in the Bible. Now he says, I'm the morning star. They're saying essentially that he is the venereal, which assuages your fear of harm and punishment. So basically, it's this chaotic, mentally ill oscillation between paranoia and fear and cowardice on the one hand, and escapism and addiction to this feeling of relief of that fear on the other.
So in other words, the stress of society is relieved by...
That's why the way they teach about hell and sin and everything, it's all about going to the priest and confessing your sins. And
exactly, yeah.
It's all about feelings of guilt and fear being assuaged by their false Jesus or their antichrist, or I should say pseudo-Christ.
Yeah. So we got into the idea that the society is addicted to sugar because they're full of stress and guilt. And they're
addicted to sugar because it's psychologically.
Do you have difficulty taking?
Next area I want to talk about is vision. And Matthew, what do you think the most common cause of vision loss in the world is?
I don't know what the most common cause is as far as nutrition. But,
just in terms of disease, the most common is glaucoma. The second in the Middle East and other countries is trachoma, which is a spirochete infection that blows in the dust. So if you're in, say, Saudi Arabia or Yemen or whatever, the trachoma is a major factor as well. But the most common is glaucoma if you look at all the Western countries in the world. Glaucoma, and basically I'm going to have the lady from doing the demonstrations that will be coming on, and the scientific technicians from Endothelix, the Vendus system, that measures blood viscosity, the blood flow return after you compress the arteries of the arm for 4 or 5 minutes. And what happens, it demonstrates if there's not a reflex increase in blood flow, it means your endothelial production of nitric oxide and your blood flow is not rebounding, in other words. Endothelial dysfunction is what's going on there now. I want to tie this, and I'm sure you'll get a chance to put into some symbology, but what I see is not only are people losing their vision, which is tied, by the way, to endothelial wall function, to heart disease, and to glaucoma, but it also is tied directly to insulin resistance and diabetes. We talked about, again, tied with the sweet. We use Vision Max to counteract that. We use Can-C eye drops developed by Dr. Babachev, which is dimethylcarnosine. We use the carnosine, which I call the protein delinker, cell detox, glutathione, Nutritrel, and Regenerex to try to stop the free radicals. And we use DHA, which is docosahexaenoic acid that are algae-based, along with Minerals Plus to remyelinate the back of the eye. Vision loss is becoming a real epidemic because it's parallel with vascular disease, which has gone up tremendously up in the 21st century and in the 20th. For example, many people died in the early 20th century of things like starvation and pneumonia. The level of heart disease has gone up dramatically, and we've now gone into younger and younger people. So I remember when I was actually interviewing many years ago for a health network, and while I was in their actual health network center, phone center, they had a call from a 27-year-old male who was having symptoms that sounded perfectly like a heart attack, but because he was 27, they didn't send out the ambulance to this guy, and he literally tried to drive his way to the hospital, and he died on his way, crashing into a light pole on the way, having a heart attack. Because he didn't think a 27-year-old would have a heart attack, and they were wrong. Vision loss is becoming an epidemic, and it's because the conventional doctors, their whole approach is just to reduce intraocular pressure with drops. And then if they don't use drops, they use a laser. Try to open up the anterior chamber of the eye. Can you get into some of the Oriental medicine on this and the new functional medicine, and maybe get into symbology of vision loss? Because I see also a lack of the ability of the average population, not everybody, there's some very aware people, but of the events of what's going on in our world, not just in America but around the world. But I also see a physical loss of vision, where we're seeing people aging faster. And I have a new term now, I call it lifespan and death span, where people have a lifespan of, say, 0 to 28 years, and then their death span goes from 28 years to 68. So the last, the last 40 years of their life are actually a part of their death span. They're actually dying, and they're getting all kinds of loss of organ and tissue function, brain function, including vision that's occurring. So people are maybe living as long, or maybe even a little longer, but they're actually having their life prolonged through polypharmacy and surgery, but they're in a pre-death state. They're not really doing good. And that's why nursing homes are expanding dramatically. That's why doctors are doing a lot of laser cataract surgery and other things. It's not good, is it?
No, as I said, the way you look at things from a symbolic perspective is holistically, you want to see what things actually mean.
Yeah, well, let's get into that in a minute. Can you give me some, because you're an expert also on the nutritional side, both from Oriental medicine. What would an Oriental medicine doctor or a naturopath, what would their approach be to, say, vision loss? Because the conventional docs, and they're more advanced clinics like Dr. Condrat in Florida.
Excuse me. In acupuncture, they would usually associate vision loss with a deficiency of the liver channel. But what that really means symbolically, and what most Oriental medicine doctors and so forth don't really know, is that means a deficiency of the solar. It means that there is a deficiency of what in the body and mind corresponds to the symbolism of the sun and its tone.
Right, and what would that involve with in terms of acupuncture or acupressure or
well,
nutraceuticals?
psychologically, it's a big problem right now throughout the entire culture and the entire planet Earth, because we just entered the age of Aquarius in 1844. So the solar is weakened by an excess of the lunar. That's where we see manifestations of revolutionary cults like Marxism and Islamism.
But that's in
so
the symbology.
It's the mentality of desire for relief. The mentality of the solar is of the martial, which is the opposite, is the solidity, seeing, interpreting, cause and effect. If A, then B. Dependence, love, right? So generally, the loss of vision is almost symbolic of a loss of love in society.
Yeah, in fact, it's an interesting quote in the New Testament that talks about the love of many will wax cold, and you see it. You see it in places like in China where they're just walking the opposite side of the street and someone's being murdered and they just kind of ignore it. You see it here in cities in the United States, like in Chicago, where there's the thug culture, and or they think, hey, well, our free speech is we can disrupt your meetings, which is, by the way, a violation of federal law. But I'm talking about let's talk about the nutraceuticals first.
Yeah, on the acupuncture, you want to strengthen
on the nutritional
the
side,
stomach channel.
Right. So what about the nutritional side? What would you say when we talk about, say, Vision Max and CanC and carnosine? What do you think is going on in terms of the naturopathy and the energy metabolism? Because you provide a service where you can even tell which acupuncture points will help, but also we use things like the bioplasm.
Yeah, my website, MatthewDeagle.com. Yes, on my website, MatthewDeagle.com, MatthewDeagle.com. You'll see a list of products or featured products that I offer. They're actually services.
Yeah, I've already had people give me feedback.
One of them is a full health analysis. One of them is a full natal analysis. I will tell you what your overall tendencies are, or even more precisely.
It's almost like it's like your DNA. When you get 23andMe, it tells you where your weaknesses are. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it's a weakness area. What, in terms of recommending acupuncture for someone with vision loss, or nutraceuticals, for example, from your naturopathy or Oriental medicine, because you've been studying this for some time, what would an Oriental medicine doctor or a naturopath or an acupuncturist recommend for someone that's getting, say, cataracts, retinal degeneration, glaucoma, things like that? What acupuncture points would they use?
As I said, in general, it would depend on the individual constitution, right? Because that will reveal what the actual cause is. But in general, you'd want to tonify the stomach channel and the liver channel and reduce the large intestine and bladder channel.
Right. So, in other words, imbalances of these. If you want to call it the biophotonic channels, can cause increased
there are other
damage.
Possible causes, right? But in general, people are doing a lot of. There are different channels responsible for the eyes and for seeing. There's different functions of vision.
Maybe when we come back, we'll talk about nutraceuticals too. We'll talk about what's in these other. So, Matthew, one of the things you've been talking about, I guess, in your show today was devolution, and I want to talk about a little bit more. We call not evolution, but I want to call advancement.
One of the causes of devolution is actually not just culture and thinking and ill breeding and so forth, but also nutrition. For instance,
right. Well, before we get into that, I wanted to present something to you and then get your feedback. I'm working with Dr. Ron Klatz in the American Academy of Anti-Aging, and I'm preparing a paper and later an ebook and a presentation that I'm going to do as a lecture probably later in Las Vegas and later this year in December about my theory about what aging. And of course, the current models of aging are just incorrect. Okay, one of them was the Hayflick model, that you had a certain number of cell divisions. Another was a free radical model. There's all kinds of models. The current model that I've put together is completely different. It turns out that your primary pacemaker of aging is actually your pineal gland in your brain. And if you look at the different chakra points or energy points or chi points in the body, prana, the pineal gland, and this goes back to an anatomist even in the Vatican over 1,000 years ago that said it was the seat of the soul. It is. It's a connection between the cord of living waters, or the silver cord, and the higher self. It also, by the way, can be calcified by fluoride, chloride, and bromide biotoxins, and it can be interfered with its connections to the lower nuclei, because there's different nuclei like the caudate and potassium nuclei in the base of the brain, And they're probably what's called a phonon maser generators that actually generate the frequencies to make all your organs be organs. For example, if you take somebody's liver out and try to preserve it in a heart-lung bypass machine for a transplant, say a week later, it falls apart. You have to have those biophotons, otherwise the liver doesn't know how to stay becoming a liver. And it turns out the brain sends down signals to actually regulate whether organs stay the same or they age. Almost like timing off a clock. Now's the time for, this to happen, that to happen. So in our stem cell support protocol for anti-aging, the first thing we recommend is, number one, we recommend the phospholipids like Nutrifos and Neurogen, Vitamin Mineral Max and Minerals Plus, our drinks, of course, Ageless Life Support Glycemics, and NutriComplete. And, of course, we want to take the minerals like Vitamin Mineral Max and Minerals Plus, which are the trace amino acid chelated minerals, copper, Regenamax. And then for the anti-aging, microdose, which is actual growth hormone. It's 100 nanograms. Mountain Red Velvet that contains IGF-1, but also 5 other hormones, plus 296 biomolecules. And we have MycoD2, which is ergothioneine, which is actually one of the first receptors activated when stem cells work. And the Mountain Red Velvet, I'm working on making a surgical version. We're actually applying for U.S. Fish and Game and the U.S. FDA to bring in Mountain Red Velvet powder, and then we want to encapsulate it in a different form of capsule so it'll get to the terminal ileum. Right now I recommend people take it and put it under their tongue to get the best effect. They will get effect by taking the capsule, but some of the biomolecules are so fragile they're probably destroyed by the stomach acid and pepsin and the digestive enzymes. Mountain Red Velvet is basically what we're trying to do is return people to a fetal state, a state of a fetus when they're most rapidly growing and they have the most rapid change of apoptosis of damaged cells and mitochondria. Believe it or not, the fastest is during fetal development when you're destroying cells and mitochondria and building new ones. And so mild hyperbaric oxygen, because the uterus is actually 1.1 ATA or atmospheres to 1.2 ATA, which is very close to our 1.3 ATA mild hyperbaric chambers. And I recommend an oxygen concentrator and an ozonator, at least the ozonator where you get our little ozonator attached to the input for the compressor. But anti-aging is something we are getting closer and closer to. In fact, we want to build a underwater spa, and we've actually picked out a location already in Mexico, not so far south of the border. And that spa will basically be under 10 feet of water equivalent in chambers. It'll basically be like a hotel or a hospital. And the entire place will be at 1.3 atmospheres. Exercise rooms, bedrooms, lounges, whatever. So that the entire place, you'll be in a mild hyperbaric chamber your entire time. We want to be able to generate specific, we call energy fields to stimulate your DNA, and also biomolecules, which we have developed by Dr. Kavinson from the Russian Academy of Sciences, and he's head of the European Anti-Aging Society. We have other anti-aging molecules combined with our nutraceuticals, so we can actually find out what's wrong with your body with the Bioplasm Clinical, which is the most advanced diagnostic machine, and a QRMA, which was our primary machine we use here, along with the functional medicine history, to actually find out what's wrong with people. It's so simple. In fact, most people just use it themselves. They don't even consult me after they get one. They just say, "Hey doc, I got this." At least a third to 40% of the tests, you can actually just look at them and say, "Oh, my zinc's low. I better take more zinc." Or, and I know where to get that from Dr. Deagle. My, Gastro Heal, or I'm going to take Minerals Plus with extra zinc. Or my copper's low. And despite taking that, they may need some copper Regenamax. Or my vitamin C is low because I'm pretty acid, so I need to increase my vitamin C or vitamin E, because it'll actually tell you what's out of balance. So anti-aging is something we can start to do now because we're under increasing stress. We're under geopolitical, emotional, and cultural stress. We're under free radical stress from Fukushima, from Wi-Fi networks and cell phones. We're under stress from demineralized soil. We're under stress from cultural changes. So, and all these things converge to create free radicals in the body, and even shut down the transport mechanisms for minerals. For example, you can see the neuropores in cells actually shut down and close on scanning electron microscopy. So, seeing that, we're on the verge of actually, within probably 5 to 10 years max, of actually conquering human senescence. In other words, the actual process of aging, we will soon be able to not only stop but reverse. Now, it doesn't mean people will live forever. It means they may die looking really good if they die naturally, but they probably won't die of the process of aging, which is 90% of disease is caused by organ and tissue aging. Most people will have to die traumatically or starvation or war. They won't be dying of the typical things we see people dying, like renal failure, heart attacks, strokes, diabetes, those kind of things, and cancer. We'll have conquered that in the next generation, at least by 20 years. The problem is
hopefully we have some kind of Manhattan Project for that.
No, the Manhattan Project comes from people like myself that come up with ideas, and I want to present it to these thousands of doctors, and I want them to run with it. And again, what we're doing now is we're trying to raise the funds, and if there's anybody out there that wants to raise the funds for it that has serious illness like diabetes or cancer or other problems, and we're looking for donations for this project, because I talked to Dr. Klatz, and he went to the 400 Fortune 500 companies and looked to say, hey, we can do this project, because there's lots of millionaires and billionaires out there. In fact, I think 3 years ago, Ron Klatz called me before he went off to the Burj Dubai Towers to all these billionaires. And they want the technology. They didn't want it to the average person. They want it for themselves to have life extension. But a lot of these things are actually pretty simple. You can do it at your home. I mean, I have my chamber right here in my studio. You can take nutraceuticals right now. You can get the nutrapharmaceuticals now from, as I say, from the Anti-Aging Society through me if you want to do what's called an anti-aging consult. And we can give you the DNA modulating peptides right now. I have them available. I just, have got my affiliate membership, so I can actually get them to you now. So you don't even need to go for a stem cell transplant. You can take for these things to regenerate your brain, your pineal gland, your liver, your kidneys. We can get specific peptides for each organ. And what I think people should understand is there's a technical thing, but there's also a geopolitical and a symbological thing going on here, and you have a breadth of knowledge that covers the symbology, also the Oriental medicine, the Ayurvedic medicine, and the naturopathy, which you're kind of melding all together. Before we get into symbology, because I know you can go off on that, I want you to tell us why you think we're so close to conquering aging at the same time our society is so dangerously close to starting like a world war or making the environment so toxic. Like from Fukushima and nuclear fusion energy, like, Einstein said, boiling water is insane. That's an actual quote from Einstein. Why are we doing this? To create power. What's the naturopathic and the Ayurvedic or Oriental approach to this aging issue, and how would you approach that in terms of symbology at the end of your talk? Because I know if you start at the beginning, the symbology will kind of consume everything, but what do you see happening? And I guess when we come back, we'll get into that, because I think anti-aging is something that everyone needs to pursue, because 90 to 95% of illness is basically aging. The rest is maybe infection on top of that, trauma, car accidents, falls, injuries. But most diseases are actually of aging as their background. Matthew, with the book, Doctor, you were able to show with the functional medicine history, which is very comprehensive. It covers Ayurvedic, Oriental medicine, herbology, surgery, medicine, genetics, epigenetics, toxicology. It's very comprehensive, and it uses the QRMA machine to tell what imbalances are present in the body, because it looks at the bioplasmatic spectral patterns of a person compared to a large database. Let's get into some of the nutrition and the Ayurvedic and the herbal stuff first, and then at the end, the symbology. Aging is a major thing to conquer. What I see happening is a contraction of what I call healthy lifespan, or called lifespan, and I see the death span increasing. I see people getting old at a younger age and developing illnesses before their time. And the healthcare system doesn't address those things correctly. If anything, it chases people into the grave or pre-embalms them. The allopathic medical system is wrong, and many of the compartmentalized systems even just say straight chiropractic without massage or acupuncture and other things. You need to have a comprehensive approach to any problem that involves the nutrition, which is why it's good that the DARK Act was destroyed by only one vote in the Senate this past week, which would allow the federal government to actually block states to notify people they're getting poison in the form of genetically modified food. So the government's not monitoring Fukushima Daiichi correctly.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course, there's nutritional deficiencies are a big issue. For instance, if you're black in this country and you don't live in the South or some other sunny climate, chances are you have vitamin D deficiency, and you need
that's a big deal. That's an important.
You need to take vitamin D, because even the daily recommendations for white people are too low.
Oh yeah.
So when you have very dark skin and you're not producing enough vitamin D in your skin from the sunlight, you absolutely have to take vitamin D3.
Yeah. And not only that, the rate of cancer growth even is related. We have people that are snowbirds, and their doctors have actually monitored with volumetric studies with CT scans their cancer, and their cancer grows faster when they go back to Canada and don't have the sunlight. Just going to the south of like Florida or California or Arizona slows the rate of their cancer growth. Just doing that.
Just having the vitamin D.
Yeah,
but you can of course substitute for the sunlight something like your product, MyCell D3, a very high quality vitamin. In fact,
and the Myco D2, which is
D I know of on the market.
Plus the Myco D2, which is a mushroom-based one, which is has organothionine, and also it helps oncomycin to stimulate your cells to fight cancer. What other things do you see on the?
Well, something else that causes disease is impurities in the water. Look at what happened in Flint, Michigan. You can't just naively assume that because water comes out of a tap, it's good for you. You have to have some kind of filtration system.
Yeah, in fact, even in Flint, if they use our whole host system and then a Bev 100 or 300, the water would be potable, would be drinkable. The problem is that you can take toxic water and detoxify it, but of course you're going to have to change your filters more often.
Yeah, you have to get something like a Bev 100 or a Pure Water Systems.
Yeah, and if you had a whole host system, we have a whole host system here in Southern California. We have two Bev 300s, and we also have you have a Bev 100. We've given you a Bev for
Yeah, I have a Bev 100. It's just a simple countertop model that attaches directly to your tap and filters the water. You just have to attach the nozzle on there and then turn on the tap for about maybe a half hour to an hour, and it fills it all up.
Yeah, now the important thing is these simple things that we can do can change the trajectory of your life. They can make a huge difference if you're aware that what your deficiencies are on a QRMA or functional medicine test, or even if people are really curious and have the finances.
You want to know what your constitution is, as well as what's out there in the environment. And what
now get into the symbology, because the constitution, we can measure the QRMA and the bioplasm, but you also can do blood, urine, and stool tests.
The best way to know your constitution, in my opinion, is to look at your natal astrology and your name, because believe it or not, those simple symbolic influences are one of the strongest influences on us. Secondarily, you want to look at your genetic ancestry, and for that I recommend looking at 23andme.com. You can send a saliva sample over and have them test your genetics. Because the main influences on your constitution are astrology, your name, and your genetics.
Yeah, the other one is the QRMA is the best bioplasmatic technology. And then if you want to follow it up, you can do functional medicine consult, and I can recommend specific tests at many, many labs. And these test kits, by the way, these test kits will be sent to your home.
And there's also a Gentech also that has been doing a test for various diseases, right? Yeah,
but there's some with just genetics. You can actually measure the organic acids and the metabolites in your body, and even heavy metal toxins. For example, through Genova Labs, you can measure 22 packed red cells of all your minerals and heavy metals and toxins.
So I recommend everybody have both a full natal analysis, which I offer from my website, MatthewDeagle.com, to know what symbolic influences are on your personal character, which is how your psyche controls your body. Secondarily, you have to get your genetics tested as well to see what kind of racial makeup you have and what kind of alleles you have for various diseases. You can look up the SNPs online, even though...
well, you can actually do... the way you can do it, Matt, is this. It's called Prometheus. And for $5, that's all it costs. Prometheus will do an analysis of your gene SNP predispositions to different illnesses.
You have to get the 23andMe report first, and then you put it into Prometheus.
Right. Now, the other thing that's available is you can measure these organic metabolites through, say, labtestingdirect.com and et cetera, and I can direct you to
you want to know those three things. You want to know your astrological and psychological constitution, which affects your health and your body. You want to know your genetic makeup. And thirdly, you want to get a test of your present levels, like my dad said.
Right, and the QRMA is the best overall screening test. Plus, it doesn't cost you anything. Once you have a machine, for you and your family, 2 consults a year for each family member free, in full analysis of your QRMA. And if you want to do the more advanced testing, we can recommend all kinds of things, imaging tests, 23, not only 23andMe, but also even connect you with a genetic counselor if we do find problems. And I can provide protocols of nutraceuticals, a diet, etc., to overcome genetic disorders. For example, somebody has a bizarre genetic disorder I can do an analysis of their organic metabolites and say these are the nutraceuticals and the dietary changes you need to do to overcome this particular imbalance.
Yeah. And I mean, it goes further than just the health as well, because these symbolic influences and genetic influences influence your character strongly as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And you aren't necessarily always in the best environment for your own personal character. Like,
right.
For example, in general, blacks in the USA are not as compatible or are more negatively affected by our materialistic culture than whites are, because whites have adapted to a kind of more mercurial.
Give me an example of. You're very correct there, Matt. You know, one of the problems.
Therefore, you have to look at your genetics and your character and follow a path in life which is compatible with the highest level of evolution of your own genetics.
Did you know that black children are 3 times as likely to turn autistic from stack vaccines and are genetically modified foods? 3 times as likely. That's based on their genetic predispositions because they haven't been exposed like whiter populations to a lot of these toxins in the northern cultures, and they have gene SNPs that make them far more fragile in the sense to toxic exposure. So if you take a black child, they're more likely, 3 times as likely, based on their genetics, to actually get autism caused by giving them too many vaccines at once. Which again, at least we got Trump to agree to that, but they have to understand.
Another problem is that just the way of thinking and the kind of education we have in the West is much more materially oriented. It's not symbolic and intuitive enough. So as a result, because blacks have adapted generally to thinking more intuitively and reactively, if their intuition isn't cultivated well enough, it leads to bad intuition or to foolish reactivity.
Which is why, in a sense, I call it the code of many colors. Each national group has a specific super aptitudes. For example, blacks are very good at.
That's part of the reason why this multicultural policy of Europe is not a good idea, because different races have adapted to different climates, different cultures, and different ways of thinking. So they have different maximum capacities and different abilities.
Exactly. For example, black cultures have more people that are.
You need to cultivate yourself according to your own character astrologically, according to your genetic makeup and your racial character, and according to nutrition. Right. All those.
For example, I was just going to make a point about blacks. You'll see more black athletes, see more black musicians, more black people they're particularly good at what I call expressive and more what we call artistic things. So
the problem is that in our culture in general, because of the Catholic Church and because of atheism and so forth and Renaissance humanism, in general, the things that blacks are naturally better at are less evolved in our culture, and so naturally they're going to fall behind because there's not enough development in intuition.
Isn't that interesting? That's it. So in other words, their superiority
they have to cultivate that themselves in order to reach a level comparable to the level of evolution.
Which is why the degradation of their black culture such a detrimental effect on their health.
That's part of the reason why it's so detrimental, is because not only do we have all these health influences like insufficient sunlight, vitamin D, lead poisoning, malnutrition of all kinds, but there's also the incompatibility of the evolution with the Western culture. I would say that, for instance, the Christian church is false.
We're going in 5 seconds.
Always is, and Islamism have more negative effect on Africa than anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Or to the IRS. Get on.